12. This is the second part of the Stanford prison experiment and week 4. Previously, we discussed what happened how did the experiment start, who were the candidates, the uniform of both prisoners and guards. Our session today starts with the day 1 in experiment. The day starts at 2:30 a.m. The prisoners are rudely awakened from their sleep by the blasting of the whistles, and they do many counts. These counts served as the purpose of familiarizing the prisoners with their numbers. They would stand, say their numbers out loud in order, and then they would do push ups. At first, the prisoners were not completely into their role and they did not take the counts too seriously. So were the guards. They were not feeling authoritative yet. Push ups were a common form of physical punishment imposed by the guards to punish the prisoners. Uh, Zimbardo and his team thought that it was a juvenile action, but later on they learned that this type of punishment was done in the Nazi concentration camps. And to level up the level of the punishment, one of the guards would step on the prisoner's back, or they would make the prisoners sit or step on the back of their prisoner friend who was doing the push-up. The first day passed without any incidents and no clashes happened. But on the beginning of the second day, there was a surprise. Now, the guards were divided into 12, as you can remember. These 12 were divided into night shift, morning shift, and extra or backup. So they divided the 12 guards into 4, 4, and 4. 4 were on the morning shift, 4 were on the night shift, and 4 served as backup in case anything happened. They were always on call. But they all stayed inside the psychology department. Even the guards did not know where they were. What happened is, on the beginning of the second day, when the guards went to wake up the prisoners, there was a problem. The guards could not open the doors of the prison to wake them up. They also saw that the prisoners rebelled. They removed the stocking caps, they ripped off the numbers, and they barricaded themselves inside the cells. This happened before the swapping of the shifts. This happened at 2:30 a.m., which was before the night shift left and the morning shift came. So when the morning shift guards came, they were upset not only from the prisoners, but they were also upset from the guards because they were too lenient. They didn't take any actions. So what happened is they called first the guards who were waiting on standby. So all of them, the morning shift, the night shift, and the backup guards, they were all present. And then they got a fire extinguisher, which shot a stream of skin chilling carbon dioxide to try to suffocate the prisoners. When they were weakened, the guards broke into the cell, they stripped the prisoners naked, and they took the beds out. They forced the ringleaders of the prison into solitary confinement, and they began to harass and intimidate the prisoners. This was only the first level of the punishment. The rebellion was crushed, but there was a new problem facing the guards. Okay, what the problem was, we need to use psychological tactics instead of physical ones. So what happened is they started making a privilege cell, not only a punishment cell. The three cells, one was where they lived, the other one was the hall, and the third one was called a privilege cell. The privilege cell was the total opposite of the hole or the solitary confinement. The guards used it as a reward. The three prisoners who were least involved in the rebellion were given special privileges. They went to the cell, they got the uniforms back, they got their beds back, and they were allowed to wash and brush their teeth. What happened to the other prisoners? They were not. Also, the privileged prisoners were allowed to eat or they got special food, while the other prisoners lost the chance or lost their right to eat. What was the effect of this? The privileged cell is that it broke the solidarity among prisoners. They were not united because they saw that this was unfair. What happened is, which was not expected, after half a day happened, some changes happened. After half a day passed, they took the three least who were in the privileged cell, they put them back with the other guards, and they took with the other prisoners, and they took another three and they put them in the privileged cell. So they took some of the bad people and they took them into the good cell or the privileged cell. This started confusing the prisoners. At the same time, when the first prisoners who went into the privileged cell went back into the punished cell, the prisoners thought that these are now spies of the guards, so they stopped talking to each other. Similar tactics happened in real prison. Why? To break prisoner alliances. Okay, now the guards were especially tough on the ringleader of the rebellion, prisoner number 5401. He was a heavy smoker, and they controlled him by regulating the opportunity to smoke. This really crushed him because he wanted to commit suicide, as he mentioned later on in his letters to his girlfriend. Less than 36 hours into the experiment, prisoner number 8612 began to suffer from acute emotional disturbance. He started having disorganized thinking, uncontrollable crying, and rage. Zimbardo sent a prison consultant to interview and talk with prisoner 8612. So when the consultant was talking with prisoner 8612, he started by offering him that instead of being a prisoner, we will make a deal and you can be the informant of the administration instead of being a prisoner, and this will get you much points. But instead, prisoner 8612 wasn't thinking straight. He didn't even hear what the consultant was saying, and he started acting more crazy, screaming and cursing that was out of control. So he had to be released, or they had to take him out of the experiment. The next day, which was day 3, there was a couple of parents and friends who finally reached the Stanford prison experiment or the psychology department, and they were worried because they did not know what happened to their kids. So, what happened is that the prisoners were washed, shaved, groomed, and they had them cleaned, fed, and happy. They played music on the intercom, and they got a cheerleader to greet the visitors at the desk. A couple of more visitors came to the prisoners, and they knew that this was an experiment, okay? So they were not really worried about them. They made the parents wait for half an hour, and they told them about the rules that only 2 visitors could see the prisoner, and it was only limited to a couple of minutes. Some of the parents complained, but they followed the rules. The Some of the parents also got upset when they saw how fatigued and disturbed their sons were. But the superintendent or the director or the warden started to tell them that these conditions are to make them tougher, to teach them to be how to be men. They also even used questions to shift the situation, like, what's the matter? Don't you think that he can handle this situation? Don't you think he's tough enough? So this usually made the parents answer back that no, our kids are tough enough and they're men enough, and they left without questioning anything. The next major event that happened was that they heard that the guards or they heard that the prisoners were talking about a mass escape plan. Why? Because when prisoner 8612 escaped, he told the people about what happened inside and that he was going to come back and take the rest of the prisoners out. Zimbardo was very upset. He wanted to turn to the police department, but the police department this time refused because they said that they did the necessary for the experiment and they cannot be involved again. The day passed and Zimbardo discovered that this was only a rumor. This was a very hard trick because Zimbardo discovered that he was worried about the experiment and he was involved in the experiment as much as the students or the prisoners were. Because the guards heard about the rumor and the rumor did not happen, the guards wanted to pay back these rumors or to pay back the prisoners of what they said. So the guards escalated the level of harassment, the level of humiliation. They made the prisoners suffer. They forced them to do a lot of repetitive, humiliating work, such as cleaning out the toilet bowls with their bare hands, and push ups, jumping jacks, and anything else they could think of. At this point of the study, Zimbardo invited a Catholic priest to sit with the prisoners. He talked with the prisoners to see if they are trying to get out or what are they trying to do as part of this situation. For his surprise, none of the prisoners answered to the priest or told him that they were even trying to escape or trying to reach to their parents and friends outside telling them what is really happening. What happened is that their personal identities began to disappear. There was one single prisoner, 819. He did not want to speak to the priest. He, the previous days, felt sick. He refused to eat and instead he asked to see a doctor. Eventually, they persuaded him to go out of his cell and talk to the priest. And as soon as he started talking to the priest, he broke down and he began to cry hysterically. The priest, to calm him down, took the chain off his foot, took the cap off his head, and told him that he will get some food and will see a doctor. But while he was saying this to prisoner 819, he heard the guards with the prisoners outside, and they were saying a repetitive sentence. This sentence was prisoner 819 is a bad prisoner because of what prisoner 819 did. My cell is a mess. This sentence has been repeated over a dozen times by the prisoners. As soon as 819 heard this, he started crying uncontrollably and he could not stop. When the priest asked prisoner 819 about what happened, the prisoner answered in a very demeaning sentence, which is in one voice, he said, 819 is bad. The priest took prisoner 819 and wanted to leave, but the prisoner refused to leave. He was very upset. There were tears in his eyes, and he did not want to go back to the prisoners because they think he is bad. Again, this was a very different situation where the prisoner was acting like a child and with a very disturbed personality. The priest then broke up and he started to tell prisoner 819, "You are not 819. You are," and he mentioned his name, "and my name is Dr. Zimbardo. I am a psychologist. I am not a priest. I'm not a prison superintendent. And this is not a real prison. This is just an experiment. And those are students. They're not prisoners, just like you." This was a very shocking sentence for him because he stopped crying, and just like a small child, he was in a state of shock. You also need to know that there were types of guards. The guards were divided into three types. The first type were the tough but fair guards. They followed the prison rules, but they were fair enough. They did not do any harm. The second types of guards were the good guys. They did little favors for the prisoners. They did not punish them. They never punished them. They got them their, for example, cigarettes. They did them favors. They did not want to be mean or tough. Finally, the hostile guards. These guards were trying to do all the humiliation attitudes. They enjoyed the power they had. They did not have any good personality or behavior. The only link between personality and prison behavior was that the prisoner with a high degree of authoritarianism that did not last with the others, which means that the prisoner with the toughest character or personality as a guard, he was the most hostile. As a prisoner, he was the last one to break up. Particularly, there was very one guard who was named John Wayne after an evil character in one of the movies because he was very hostile, he was very mean, and he did a lot of hard punishments. As for the prisoners, there were certain coping styles for the prisoners, or how did they react. Some of the prisoners rebelled and they fought with the guards. Other prisoners broke down emotionally. A third type of prisoners developed a psychomatic rash over the body, and other tribes tried to cope by being good prisoners so that maybe they can leave. So some prisoners fought back, some prisoners went psycho, some prisoners had physical problems, and some were just trying to be good to get done with it and to get out of the place. But the problem is that by the end of the study, the prisoners were disintegrated. They were no longer united. They were just a bunch of isolated humans, just like a prisoner or a hospital with mental patients. The guards won complete control of the prison, no rebellions happened, and whatever command they did, there was blind obedience of all of the types of the guards. There was one final act of rebellion that happened by prisoner 416, which that he did not want to eat or do counts or willingly do any action with the other prisoners. So he was put into solitary confinement. He stayed there in the solitary confinement for 3 hours, but he wouldn't cope. Again, instead of the prisoners pushing him, making him a hero, encouraging him to continue, no one even cared and no one asked about him. The guards went and told the prisoners that 416 can go out of his solitary confinement if they're willing to give up their blankets. But surprisingly, they did not. and they left their fellow prisoner to suffer all night in solitary confinement. On the fifth night, which was the sixth day of the experiment, some parents started contacting a lawyer in order to get their son back, but the team discussed it with the parents and with the legal authorities. It was just an experiment, but the parents still did not agree. Zimbardo could not fight the attorneys or the lawyers, he could not fight the parents. The Catholic priest that came inside and questioned the prisoners along with the cheerleader, they all disagreed about what was happening inside the experiment. It was clear that he had to end the study. It was an overwhelmingly powerful situation. The prisoners were bit by bit behaving in a psycho way, and the guards were behaving more and more in a sadistic way. Even the good guards could not help it. So, what happened is only after 6 days, the simulation or the experiment was called off. Instead of the 2 weeks planned experiment, it only lasted for 6 days. On the last day, before the prisoners and the guards could leave, Zimbardo collected all the prisoners, along with the guards, along with the staff, and they all sat in one big room. He sat down with them, thanked them for being part of the experiment, of course, informed all the prisoners that this was only a part of the experiment that they signed for in the ad, and he had the prisoners and guards sit down face to face with each other so they can get out all of the negative emotions. He was trying to do this. Why? To reduce the conflict between the prisoners and guards when they go out of the experiment. 2 months after the study, they read the reaction of prisoner 416, who was placed in the solitary confinement and no one wanted to give up the blanket for them. He stayed for a whole night for a whole day, sorry, in the solitary confinement. Was part of what he wrote. He said that I began to feel that I was losing my identity, that the person that I call Clay, the person who put me in this place, the person who volunteered to go into this prison, was drifting away. It was not regarded as an experiment, but it was only a state of mind. I began to feel that the identity, the person that I was decided to be or that I was going to be, I was 416. I was really my number. Okay. On August 20, 1971, the study or the Stanford prison experiment was terminated. Of course, after it was terminated, a lot of hassle has happened. When the prisoners went back or the students went back to their families and told them about what happened, the parents all filed cases against Zimbardo and his team. Dealing with these, this was just one part of the problem because the other part is that less than 1 month later, a riot or a rebellion in one of the prisons in New York happened because they heard about the Stanford prison experiments. Now, one of the things that they also found out from the experiment or from observing the experiment only for 6 days is that prisons have the powerful ability to dehumanize people. They turn them into objects and they insert the feeling of hopelessness in them. So, this answered Zambardo's question that people are only good or evil based on the situation or based on the environment that they're in. But it also raised another issue, which is that there is a need to change what happens inside institutions. what happens inside prisons, what happens inside mental facilities. Instead of punishing the people inside them, there should be a more corrective way to deal with these people so that then when they leave, they don't have to be more violent over time. Because as the results and as the researchers have proved in statistics, that people who go inside prisons when they go out, they are more violent than before and they want to punish and pay back, get their payback, which increases the percentages of crimes over the year. This was the summary of the Stanford prison experiment. You are required to answer the questions that follow, and we will discuss them in the extra care session. If you have any questions regarding the experiment itself, please write it down. Thank you.